Good morning, Abundant Life Church. This is Pastor Chris. Today we're going to be taking a look at John chapter 9, verses 13 down through 41. Now, in the previous section, Jesus had healed this man who had been born blind, and this is going to be a follow-up to that. Let me tell you a story first. Oh, I don't remember how old my kids were. They were like in college age or so. And we all went to Disneyland. And, even though they're in college, they're not little kids, but they're excited to go to Disney. I was excited to go to Disneyland. And so we're all kind of giddy. And we stayed at a hotel that was just across the street from the park. And we're on the sidewalk, just all bouncing around, happy to be there. And these are my sons. And even to this day, when the me and my sons get together, it's the same thing. We're like little kids, and they're giving me a hard time about something, I'm giving them a hard time. And one thing they love to do, we'd be walking along, and if there was a bush or something, at the last second they'd try and push me into the bush. I don't know where they got that kind of behavior, but we're walking across the street. We're at a crosswalk, and as we're walking, here comes this bus that's pulling up to the crosswalk. It's stopping, it's got the red light, we're crossing in front of it. At the last second, I went and I pushed my oldest son, Tyler, and he didn't know it was coming. And he got his feet kind of tangled up and he fell. Now, it wasn't even close. There was no chance the bus was going to run over him. It wasn't close. But the problem was the bus driver couldn't see that. He couldn't see that you're not close to running over this guy. And I happened to be looking right at the bus driver as my son went down, and this horrified look on his face, thinking, I just ran over somebody. He didn't. He didn't. I, Looking back on it, I probably shouldn't have burst out laughing like that, but the look on his face was hilarious. And my son, for the rest of the day, was saying, Dad, when they say somebody threw you under the bus, it's usually a figure of speech. You literally threw me under a bus. I'd say, well, yeah, but I took you to Disneyland. Doesn't that balance things out? He just would not let that go. My father threw me under the bus. Now, I tell you that story for this reason. When we see how this Jesus healing the blind man, the aftermath of that, we're going to see his parents involved, and they threw their son under the bus. They wouldn't stand up for their son. In fact, it was just, oh no, we don't want to get involved in this. We don't want to get in trouble. I thought parents were supposed to protect their kids. What would make parents do such a thing? That they wouldn't stand up for their son when he committed the crime of getting healed. Well, we'll take a look at that story. We're in, like I say, John chapter 9. We'll start in verse 13. And as soon as my stupid phone wants to turn itself back on, here we go. Let's read verses 13 through 15. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now, the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. It wasn't just the fact that Jesus healed someone. The problem was he made mud to heal him. And as silly as that sounds, technically they said, hey, that's working. And that's a Sabbath violation. It gave them some leverage to use against Jesus. But to be sure, they needed to interrogate the man that Jesus had just healed. Verses 16 and 17. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. Others asked, how can a sinner perform such signs? So they were divided. Then they turned to the blind man. Again, what have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he's a prophet. What they really wanted to do was find somebody bigger than just this blind man. They wanted to find somebody that they could hold against Jesus. They'll come up with the theory that this guy wasn't really blind, that he and Jesus had faked it. Now, where did they get this theory that Jesus and this blind man had been, conspiring to fake this? Well, they got the theory by just making it up out of their imagination. They were not trying to find out what happened. They were looking for ways to twist things to back up the lie that they were espousing. Now, exactly an objective investigation, is it? Then the Pharisees dragged this poor guy's parents in to see if they can get the mom and dad to back up his lies. Um, Look at verses 18 down through 21. They still didn't believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Is this your son? They asked. Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it now he can see? We know he's our son, the parents answered, and we know he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age, he'll speak for himself. This really gets sad here. They pressure these parents to admit that their son had never actually been blind. Now, his folks aren't going to go that far, but notice how hard they tried to shift the focus off of them back onto their son. Go ask him. In other words, go after him, not us. We'll tell you what you want as long as you leave us alone. Why would parents do that? Why would they throw their son under the bus? That's a terrible thing for them to do. Verses 22 and 23 say this. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who had already decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, he's of age, ask him. Were they really that scared? Yes, they were. What would make them that frightened? Well, the Pharisees used the threat of being put out of the synagogue. I'm I'm shooting this on what is today, February 23rd. I have no idea what day you're going to see this. I do these weeks in advance. This is actually, my wife and I are leaving for Africa this afternoon. Well, when I'm over there, I teach church history. And one of the big things about church history is in the Roman Catholic Church during the Middle Ages, they really used, and they still have this power. They don't use it like they used to. They had the power of excommunication. What that meant is they could throw you out of the church. You might think, well, just go to another church then. It doesn't work that way. It was just the church. There was only the Catholics. Protestantism hadn't come along yet. If you got kicked out of the church, it wasn't just you can't worship with us on Sunday morning anymore. It was you are no longer right in the eyes of God. In other words, they were condemning you to hell. This is what the Pharisees were doing by throwing somebody out of the synagogue. It was saying you are not one of God's children anymore. This was terrifying. The Catholic Church used it as a means of terror to keep people in line. These Jewish leaders were doing the same exact thing. The parents want no part of this. Oh, well, don't kick us out. You can kick our son out. Just leave us alone. This shows the leverage that the Pharisees had over these people. These people are terrified of not being right in the eyes of God. They're terrified of no longer being able to fellowship with their friends. In fact, they're so scared they can be pressured into giving up their own son. This is the kind of atmosphere the Pharisees created, and this is the kind of atmosphere that they used against people. They could even get family members to turn on each other. What do you think Jesus had to say about this? We'll talk about that next time. Till then, have a great day.